started the recording. So welcome today. I think we'll start off just for the benefit of those online, introducing ourselves. So I'm Councillor Francesca O'Brien. I'll be the convener today. If I go to my left.
I'm Rachel Percival. I'm the Scrutiny Officer.
Councillor Will Thomas, representing Mumbles.
Yes, good morning. My name is Councillor Michael Locke, representing Scrutiny.
Councillor Peter Black, representing Cumberland.
Or Ralph, Strategic Economic Regeneration Manager.
Alice Marks, Team Leader, Private Sector Housing.
Sally Jones, Empty Property Officer.
Morning, Tom Price. I'm the Divisional Environmental Health Officer for Pollution Control, Private Sector Housing and Building Control.
Judith Williams, Operations Manager in the Housing Service.
Richard Horlock, Economic Regeneration Manager.
Carol Morgan, Head of Housing and Public Health.
Councillor Andrew Lewis, Joint Deputy Leader and Cabinet Member for Service Transformation.
Amazing, thank you all. If we start the first item on the agenda, which is apologies for absence. We don't. Apologies for absence.
Yeah, we've had apologies from Councillor Stuart Rice.
Thank you. If we go to item number 2, which is disclosures of personal and prejudicial interest, if there's anything to declare. Nobody online. Okay. And item number 3, prohibition of whip votes and declaration of party whips. Nothing online. And moving on to question 4, or item 4, which is public questions, but I don't believe there's been.
We've had no public questions.
Okay. Which moves straight on to item number 5, which is what we're all here for, which is the Empty Properties Report. So I'd like to welcome the Cabinet Member, Councillor Andrea Lewis, who I'm sure, would you like to introduce the report? Lovely, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I don't intend on speaking at length on the report. Obviously, you've had the report before you, but I just wanted to reference that even though you see a cast of thousands here today, which clearly demonstrates that empty properties is a broad subject which covers a number of services and departments across the council. However, we do have a small team of 1 in terms of the officer lead, which is Sally, who's here with us today. So a post of 0.8 dealing with all the empty properties and trying to bring those back into use. We know that homelessness is the most significant in terms of pressures that we've ever seen. And so bringing every building back into use is important. And I hope members of the committee will agree that Sally has made incredible inroads in terms of the numbers that she's delivering, bringing back into use. So I won't say more than that. I know we've got quite a few questions this morning.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Would the officers, anyone would like to highlight or summarise from the report? I know all members have hopefully read the report. I don't know if one of the officers wants to make any comments on it before we go into the questions.
Thank you, Chair. Only to sort of state really, to reiterate what Councillor Lewis has said there, is it covers such a wide area. So the report has been put together from the various sort of services and teams that sort of impact with empty properties. While Sal here does the lion's share of the work there by herself, there's obviously other players with the council tax, with other colleagues in housing. So it's a much wider remit of report. But I think perhaps it's easier, as you've all read the report, that we get stuck in.
That's it. Thank you all. So I will hand over to Councillor Peter Black. So we have got a list of questions. So if I just go by the councillor. So Peter, if you want to go first.
Yeah, thank you. They seem to have grouped all my questions together. But I just want to say on the record that actually at least Swansea has an empty homes officer, when not all the councils in Wales actually have an empty homes officer. So, I can see that we are taking this seriously, which is, to be commended. So my first question, going to the table in paragraph 2.5, I noted that between 23-24 and 24-25, there's been basically a 10% increase, a sudden jump in the number of properties empty for longer than 6 months, whereas up until that time, it's been quite steady. Obviously, this is outside our control, but are we aware of any factors that might have led to that sudden jump? Are we recording them better or something, or is there anything happening?
Thank you, Councillor. We're not really aware of any particular reason per se for this effective sort of 200 or so property increase from last year. However, there are many reasons why a property could remain empty. It could be on the market and it hasn't sold within that window that we're searching. It could be in the process of probate. It could be having works done that have stalled due to increase of costs. So it's not as straightforward as being able to pinpoint a factor. Analysis will be done on the figures at the end of year. As you say, 92 brought back last year. But it's something that's beyond our sort of control and not always straightforward to understand, unfortunately.
It's interesting jump. Have to see if that persists or something, because it's quite worrying that we got a 10% jump at the time. Yeah.
I say we'll carry on as putting the stats together as we do in the analysis that Sal does every year. We will keep monitoring it and analyse where we can, and if trends are forming, then obviously we'll act upon those.
Okay. The second question: empty dwelling management orders. I'm assuming these still exist. They're not actually mentioned directly in the report, but I gather there are some issues in there which might have been resolved through that sort of mechanism. Are we still using those, and are they effective?
Question again. Yes, they do still exist, and yes, we have twice the process has been entertained in Swansea and gone through in Swansea, one successfully, and we still have that empty dwelling management order in place. Sal first processed it in 2009. That was then reviewed again in 2016 in the 7-year cycle, and again in 2023. So we are now managing that property. The other attempt of entertaining that process, the costs started to spiral. And it is a very cost-intensive and time-intensive resource for the authority. So that one was sort of stopped in the process as not being a viable option for us. So we haven't processed any further. House of Commons issued a briefing note in 2019 in September in England, confirming that only 38 interim EDMOs have been introduced to English authorities.
Yeah.
We don't have a figure, for Wales, but it just shows the difficulty in using them, and the resources required with them is that they're not a successful measure to date.
Yeah, when I was an assembly member, I think that's the 2009 one, the one I identified at that time. I think that was the only one in Wales at the time. So I don't think it's being more widely used across Wales either. Yes.
Sorry, can I just add a little bit? Is the visually, when you see an enforced sale compared to a empty dwelling management order, the file for the empty dwelling management order is like that, and the file for the enforced sale is like that. And the empty dwelling management order never goes away.
Yeah.
I know that, so it is one affordable house on the market, but it's you have to constantly go back, renew the kitchen, renew the boiler, do the insurance.
It puts the onus for that property onto the council, basically.
Yeah.
So, in the recent wins, the fence blew down at the one property we have in Edmo. So then Sal has to take her time to find someone to go and fix the fence. And, it puts the responsibility, and obviously with Sally only being Sally, there's only so much she can do. It's very, very labour intensive to do, unfortunately.
Yeah. And it's being managed without us actually owning the property. We're just managing it and letting it out and have to spend the money.
But it's as if we do own it. Yeah. So obviously we have to keep the accounts. We have to make sure they're kept up to date, because if we do have someone come forward who says, that's my property, we need to have records of everything we've ever spent and obtained from rent. It's onerous, to say the least.
Yeah, I got that impression. How does the enforced sale work?
The enforced sale is a lovely process. It's basically I go along. I've always got an enforced sale in the back of my mind whenever I serve a notice. So if I serve a notice, the owner fails to do the work, we do that work in default. That creates a local land charge debt. We can use them after we've given them time to pay, and if they don't pay, we use as a debt mechanism, a debt recovery mechanism process. So it's quite straightforward. I write to the owner and say, these are the notices served, this is the bill, you haven't paid. We're looking at an enforced sale. So I leave it a month. Month later, I write to them and saying we're serving a notice, under the Law of Property Act, and then how many months later we can sell the property if they don't settle that debt, or if they don't settle the debt. and they will argue about the settling the debt, but they don't settle it. And so we sell the property in auction, and then a new owner buys it, new owner renovates it, and you know it's one off the market. So it's a work in partnership with legal.
And how many enforced sales would you do in a year?
It's where and as if appropriate.
Yeah.
So maybe one, maybe two a year.
Right.
But it has to be that appropriate circumstances where you've served a notice and the owner's failed to pay, and it has to be a local land charge.
But you can only serve a notice under certain circumstances if the property is in substantial disrepair or
Yes.
it's accessible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but it's always on my mind. It's always whenever I go into an inquiry, you know, so, and it's been brilliant at dealing with those long-term empty properties where people have not stepped up at all.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's a fantastic process.
When it starts affecting adjoining properties, that's at that stage you can carry out the repairs.
Yeah.
And stuff,
So if I was looking at
Yeah.
my Edmo property, I would probably look at it as an enforced sale now rather than as an Edmo.
Yeah.
If I'm being honest, because it's just
fair enough. Yeah.
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 The,
Are you going on to the next
No,
one, Peter?
no, no.
Only just to
Yeah,
stay on the
that's
same topic instead of going back and forth.
Yeah,
Councillor Thomas.
Thanks. Yeah, just a question on that. So when we do the for sale, is that only when it's a risk to other people or other properties, or have we done for sales on long-term dilapidated buildings?
Done enforced sales on a variety of different, I think how many, I can't remember, 23. So we've even done some on some land actually in Ponta de Lais. Yeah, it's basically a debt recovery mechanism, and sometimes it can be that there's not a massive amount wrong with the property. It's just that we've served a notice under prevention damage like pests because overgrowth, but I'm coming backward and forward to that property year on year to do the same notice. The owner's not paying. So I just think, you know, because my thought process is they've got that opportunity to do that work in default. They've got that opportunity to pay for the work. So, you know, and I always use a measured and incremental approach, I feel.
Okay, so just to clarify, we because obviously I can see both sides here. Obviously, if you own a property, it should be yours, and you should be able to do with what you want to do with it. That's what the Western world's based on, I suppose, freedom and property rights. But if the council deems that property should have better use, and it's not only when it's a danger or it is affecting another property, we have intervened in properties that, for example, the council has an opinion that should have a better use. Do we do that sometimes?
It wouldn't be a case of we felt it could be put to better use. We wouldn't use it in those circumstances. It's purely where we've been dealing with a long-standing empty property that's having an adverse effect. So usually that's because it's having an adverse effect on the neighbourhood. Perhaps there's damp coming into a neighbouring property. It's causing rats and vermin. There's, you know, the land's getting overgrown, the property's falling into worse repair. We don't just go in and sell a property from under someone's feet where, you know, they've left it empty for a year and they're coming back. It's not used. It's very much looked at as a whole, you know, strategy. So if Sal's having to go back over a period of a couple of years, we're serving a notice for drainage because it's affecting a neighbouring property. We're then serving a notice because the garden's overgrown and there's rats. We would then look at that as an option if the owners weren't engaging and they weren't coming forward with an alternative, you know, strategy to deal with it.
Yes, sorry, just to confirm, because the things you mentioned there are things that are affecting the community or buildings. So I'm just to clarify, we don't ever go, oh, that property looks a bit shabby. It's right in the middle of the community. Shall we sell it? You know, that never happens, does it?
That's not the intention. Sorry, but my mic was on. No, that's not the process. It isn't, as you described there, of saying, well, we feel it should be having a better use. It is a recovery of debt that the authority has incurred due to service of a notice, for example, as described. So no, it's not for that process.
Back over to you, Peter.
Yeah, Rose actually very handily walked into my next question, which is about compulsory purchase orders, because I spent 10 years in the Senate arguing local authorities need more powers to deal with empty properties. I understand you can only use a CPO if you actually got a use for the property. We can't, for example, use a CPO to where a property's been empty for 40 years to take it over and then sell it on. But do you think should we be lobbying to get those sort of powers? Do you think would that be helpful?
The powers are there.
Yeah.
But again, it's a resource issue. It's an expensive process to follow. You know, none of the costs are recoverable. All the costs are recoverable from the enforced sale. And I think the document is how many pages long? 632. From Welsh Assembly Government, it's 632 pages long. So I would just struggle to find the time to set up a new process for an enforced sale. For a compulsory purchase. You know, I just wouldn't have the time. And there's none of the cost recoverable. So the enforced sale option is a better option for the council.
Yeah, sorry, Tom.
Just to add to that, the processes that Sal has put in place through the years of she's been employed in the networks, the resources that she has at her disposal to sort of call upon, and the informal approach she takes, that achieves the endpoint for us far quicker, far better at the moment than going through some of the lengthier processes and the resource processes that we haven't got the resource to deliver.
Yeah,
it would be nice to, but we haven't as it stands. And Sal has developed a process here, which is a very successful process, as you see the stats that we've recorded here. But it's far more. We get to that endpoint far quicker through the informal routes that Sal has instigated.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that. I mean, I get frustrated with some of the properties in my ward which have been empty for 40 years, which, you know, and I deal with Sal on a lot of those properties. I'm just thinking that, you know, I'm not thinking of a traditional compulsory purchase. The Welsh Government were able to give you the powers to say, we're going to give you the power to compulsory purchase it, sell it on, take your costs out of that and do it that way. I mean, they'd have to get primary legislation to do that, I guess. But would that be helpful? Or are you really happy that you've got all the powers you need?
It would always be a useful to have another tool in the armoury, as it were. But, you know, at the moment, we're operating very well with what Sal has implemented here. But yeah, obviously, additional resources would be beneficial as well. But, you know, primary legislation, as you say, would be required.
Yeah. Okay. So my next question, because I've done two there. Paragraph 2.25, you referred to leasing scheme Wales. Could you explain how and where that would be used? And are we using these leasing powers to bring empty properties back into use?
This would be a question that I'd need to refer back to the other side of the service.
Okay, so we are exploring joining the leasing scheme Wales. We've been talking to other local authorities who are doing it. Some have had more success than others. I think the issue is, you know, the property will be let a local housing allowance, and that is, as we all know, hasn't been uplifted as it should have been. So there are some landlords who will be interested, I think, in bringing that forward. The Welsh Government grant would be available then to bring the property up to the agreed standards. So it may be an incentive for some landlords. So we are probably going to be joining that scheme shortly.
Councillor Lewis.
Yeah, and if I can add that we also have, of course, the acquisition programme, so we can use that to bring empty properties back into use. But what we should be doing, which we do, is we carry out an extensive survey just to see what the condition of that property is. Because, of course, if we're going to do acquisitions, we need to justify that we can afford to bring that property up to the Welsh Housing Quality Standard. So often we'll do a survey and the survey will come out that it's too expensive, and so it's a no. But there are opportunities that quite often, and we've had a lot of success bringing ex-council right to buys back into council stock, and also non-council right to buys back into council stock as well. So we continue to explore those options as well.
I mean, the Welsh Housing Quality Standard is quite a high standard. I mean, if you go down the leasing scheme, would you be required to get it up to that standard, or could we get, or would you get just a lesser standard? You know, maybe higher than the private renting sector, but below what the Welsh government would require Welsh housing.
Yeah, I don't think it would need to be WHQS for the
No.
private sector leasing scheme. It would just be, you know, we'd bring it up to good EPC rating and
Yeah.
try and get it as close to a high standard as we could.
Okay, what sort of resources would they make available from the Welsh government for that? Is there grants?
Yeah, there is a grant, and I think there's funding to fund an officer to help that scheme as well. So, you know, it's quite a good incentive for us there. I think it's 25,000 for the landlord then to bring that up to standard.
Yeah, if I could just
say, I think it is pro rata though. It's if they give the property to the council, lease it to the council for 5 years, it will be not 25,000. But if they give it to the council for longer, it, you know, so I think landlords will probably go for the longer lease.
Councillor Lewis.
Yeah, thank you. Just to reference the reports that I've took this last week. Last week to Cabinet, the renewals and adaptations report, and in there you can see a list of all the grants which are available, including the landlord scheme and home fix loans, for example.
Okay, note of that. Yeah. Okay. My last question, we'd be pleased to hear. One of the things I find, I mean, I know there's nobody from finance here, so but the 100% council tax premium, I've often found that the 1 year period is too short for some people, that they have they've inherited the house or someone has died, the house is in bad condition. This is particularly true during COVID when you couldn't get the work done, and they've suddenly found themselves paying 200% council tax. I'm just wondering, would it be helpful from your perspective as opposed to a finance perspective to have a bit more flexibility in terms of those properties?
Okay, Councillor Lewis.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate nobody from finance is here, but we have had a response from finance, which I can read to you now. Properties which require or are undergoing major repair works to render them habitable can be exempt from council tax for up to 12 months. An exemption class A, and this is a statutory exemption, and the authority is not able to extend the period for which that's applied. At the end of the 12-month period, assuming the property remains unoccupied and unfurnished and the repair works are continuing, it's likely that council tax would become payable and a long-term empty property premium charge would be levied. However, when levying council tax premium charges, each case is given individual consideration, and in the circumstances described, we would consider using the available discretion to remove or delay the application of the premium charge. And they list examples, but that's quite lengthy, so I won't go through those.
They say that now, but I know instances where they haven't used that discretion, where, you know, but is that 12-month period on top of the 12 months which before it becomes eligible for the 200% council tax, or is it part of that? Yeah, so it's not 24 months, it's 12 months. So really, after 12 months, it becomes subject to the 200% charge, and there's very little discretion. Yeah, and they don't tend to use that discretion. I know, because I've been involved in some cases. I think Sally may have some views on how useful it would be.
They have got an officer, Jodie, in council tax that deals with these inquiries. So she would look at each one on an individual merit. So I'm in contact with Jodie quite regularly, in fairness.
Do you know what criteria she might use in your discussions with her, Sally?
I'm aware that that each individual would present a case, and they would take everything into a case. I think if they're going to be an owner-occupier, I think that would have some bearing, and there would be more sympathy towards that rather than somebody who's just had an empty property that's been there for 30 years and they just, you know, I'm suddenly going to renovate this property and I can't because COVID's come into play. So, you know, but I think it's Jodie would look, I don't know the individual criteria, but Jodie would look at it, and she's very good.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis.
Yeah, if I can just briefly outline an example that's been provided, just to give you a flavour. So the taxpayer had been waiting for an empty properties grant to be approved, and so had not been allowed to begin the renovations during the 12-month period due to the grant criteria requiring that the grant should be approved first. And so they were renovating the house as well in order that the family could move into it. So as a result, the premium charge was removed for a 3-month period to enable them to have time to complete the work. So there are exceptions, they are considered. And I can also recall a case where I was dealing with a lady who was slightly different circumstances, but she lived in London. Her mother passed away. Her mother was a hoarder. It took an incredible amount of time to clear the property, to bring it back up to a standard for sale. And so that exception was considered then as well, and the additional costs were waived for a period of time to enable her to have more time.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I know a few cases actually, and I have to pay tribute to the team because again, I think they're not stacked with a load of staff either. So they've worked really hard. So yeah, just upon record, thanks to them. Councillor Thomas.
Thanks. Yeah, just wondering if there's an appeals process to that if they weren't happy with the officer's decision.
Perhaps we can get that in writing for you.
Okay, that takes us on to the next question with Councillor Rowlands. Bridget, online.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say and to put on record my thanks to Sally, who I've worked with on several occasions in my ward, and being such a small team, she's always been very, very professional and got a result in the end. So I just would like to say thank you for her help with matters then. My questions are, we've got a couple of empty shops in and as most high streets have, and I'm told that if the owner of the shop says that they're used for storage, then they're exempt from council tax. I don't know if that's true. If it is the case, can more be done to make the owner put them back into action, as in either a shop or converted to residential?
Who would like to answer? If anyone.
Yeah, I don't know enough about commercial. I think there might be something, but I'm not going to draw,
Would it be okay if we follow up
Follow up
the
with a
written
written?
response for
Yeah,
that one?
It's fine. No
We
problem, thank
don't
you.
want to guess.
No, I'd rather let's get it right. And if we come back to you on that, Bridget, we'll get a written response. We'll follow it up in the letter.
Absolutely fine. That's no problem at all.
And also, Councillor Owens, do you want to do your second question as well?
Yeah. So the current powers that the authority hold for antisocial behaviour within empty properties, and this does happen an awful lot. Is there any way that this can be increased?
Thanks for the question, Councillor. I suppose initially just to try and scope out what elements of antisocial behaviour you're referring to.
Well,
if there's a context or an example, sorry, just to start the ball.
Generally, it would be I say youth, sorry, I shouldn't generalise, but generally it does tend to be youngsters that find these places very, very interesting and want to enter the properties, and this causes a lot of distress for the nearby residents, because quite often they'll light a little fire, these things can get out of control, but also then it tends to be a hub for them to hang around as well. But it does also draw rough sleepers as well. And again, that can be quite distressing for the residents.
So in that type of scenario, we have officers within the environmental health, sort of public health side. We have powers with regard to boarding up properties that have been left open. And we can look to obviously try and recover that debt from the owner if the owner exists. One issue we have there is that it can't be a land charge for us, so we do struggle to recover debt if the property is empty or the owner can't be found. There are wider sort of implications with this element of multi-agency type responses. So we do link in with the fire service, with arson reduction teams, and we do partake in the meetings with the police when we're looking at the problem-solving groups for relevant areas. So, we have our element of power with sort of boarding up type works, but also there are wider evidence gathering scenarios that we can contribute to. If you're looking at community protection powers, when looking at tackling antisocial behaviour, we can help feed into the police or into to other sort of multi-agency responses.
Okay, thank you.
I do work quite closely with the arson reduction team as well. So I quite often go on a joint visit with Janet from the arson reduction team. And so sometimes actually the fire service writing to the owner can have, it's a different perspective to the council. So again, it's that measured incremental approach, just trying to say this issue exists, it's a problem. I remind them that they're perhaps getting the premium rate council tax, the property must be a burden to them, that sort of thing. So it's and refer the neighbours to the police, unfortunately. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then, so my final question then is, and this is an example that's going on at the moment in my ward. Craigavon Park School was closed back in 2019. The property was put up for auction and someone bought it. The property is in a disgraceful state. Half work has been started, half a renovation. It seems to be on stop. The property has been left open. People have been in there. I just wondered, when council do, when we do decide to sell off a property, can't we write something in there to make sure that that property is renovated, change of use, whatever, is done within a certain time frame, rather than leave it go on for this time? And to be honest with you, it ruins the look of the village, and I'm sure this is happening in other properties throughout the city.
This is a question, obviously, that we refer back because colleagues from estates have provided a response here.
I think the response provided was about where the council still owns the property, and in this case, the property's been sold. So, would it be okay if we followed that up?
Follow up with a written response.
Fine, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think this actually is quite a common thing because we had it with Sketchy Primary, we've got it with Manston School at the moment as well as that. So maybe someone needs to have a word with the states about their policy of selling off these old schools and making sure that they, it's more responsible the way they do it.
Yeah. Okay, we move on to Councillor White online with your questions.
Thank you, Chair. Can I as well pass on my thanks as well to the housing protection team, Sally and Alice and Agent Johnson. Every time I've had to deal with this department, they've been first class. And also, it's important as well as been said by the officer that we work closely with different departments and agencies when we have got issues with this problem. And I'd like to put that on record and my sincere thanks. My question is that are there cases of where landlords own several empty properties? Can the local authority then take these up with those landlords?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, we're aware that there are some landlords that do own, more than one or a few empty properties. However, we can't sort of target them specifically under the requirements of the legislation. However, if I hand over to Sal, she'll be able to give you a good example of works that do carry on.
I do come across them every now and then. Like, for example, I had one portfolio landlord, number of empty properties. Most portfolio landlords do occupy their properties, if I'm being honest. But this particular one was struggling. He wasn't. I clocked that there was quite large council tax debts, liaised with the council tax department, and they'd been struggling with him. And because I'd built up this rapport with him over the years, I was able to ring him and say, why don't you just sell one? And introduce him to a local auctioneer, and he sold it. And it was as straightforward as that on that occasion. I mean, that's a little bit rare, but it's the groundwork I put in before that enabled me to get to that point. You know, I've just come across another empty property owner recently. Something that one of the clients said on site to me, that she'd done a similar thing with a property in Van Samlet years ago. So I thought, oh, right, okay, went back on our system, saw who it was, wrote to her and said, nicey, why don't you sell again? I was aware there was a buyer in the background, but she wasn't willing to commit. She rang me on Thursday, so she's going to sell it to this guy. So again, they seem really straightforward, but it's that slowly, creepy, catchy monkey type approach. I think that was the wrong one. Creepy. Sorry. Just turn my mic on.
It's much better then.
I like
that. Thank you. Councillor White, do you want to go to your second question?
Yes, that was very interesting, that. Yes. We just reel them in, you know, that's the saying, isn't it? Right, my second question is, what powers do the authority have to acquire a property where a house has been abandoned, like blighted properties? Obviously, if the owner passed on or they have no relatives to inherit that property, could a compulsory purchase order be used in that case, or in those cases?
Right. Enforced sale is the main go-to process. So you know, that works quite well with these ones that are completely abandoned, where the owner doesn't take any responsibility for them at all. Another thing that can happen is that it gets referred to the bona vacantia team in London, which is where there's no relatives at all, and they basically, search for relatives, and if not, the property actually goes to the state, and they deal with it. I do feel it would be lovely if we had a genealogy company that we could go to that was, on the procurement list. That would be a really nice thing to have, because we could just refer these properties to the genealogy company. They could, like find out who the owners are, and quite often they will deal with the whole estate. That's something I would like to happen, but I haven't yet had the resources to sort out, really.
Thank you. No additional comments, Councillor White? You're happy?
No, thank you. No.
Okay, fantastic. If we go on to question 12, which is from Councillor Linda James, who's online. Linda?
Hi, thank you. My question really follows on from the empty properties, but going a step further. Wandering around Swansea, walking down the street, especially in older housing areas, I've noticed plots of land where the original houses have gone. There's often still front walls and there's steps, but the house is just a heap of rubble and weeds growing there. So I just wondered, does the authority have any records of how many such plots exist? And is there any potential for new houses to be put onto the site for the council to make use of these plots and have them reused? Because they do seem rather wasteful and just create a mess in the middle of other housing.
Hi, thanks, Councillor. In terms of land within the housing revenue account portfolio, so where council homes were previously demolished, we do have records of those, and in fact we have built on a couple of those sites already, and do have a couple more sites within the More Homes development programme, where we will be looking at building on those sites in the future. I don't know if we have any records for private land in Swansea where demolition has occurred, but that's something we can look into and follow up.
Thank you.
Thank you. And next question, which is 13.4. Sorry, Andrea.
No, I was only going to suggest that if there are any particular sites that you are keen to understand the history of in terms of ownership, for example, our estates team can look into that. But often, if it's owned by someone else, it's difficult for us because we haven't got unlimited finance and resource to be able to purchase land where a home was and was demolished. I have one in my ward at the moment, which I passed yesterday with a gas explosion, as an example. But we don't own that land, so there would be a considerable cost to replace a property there. So it's weighing up, where we place our resource and where it's best placed to get the best return.
Thank you. Yeah,
It
Councillor
occurs
Black.
to me that there are a number of estates which have land left. I mean, Sketty Park Estate has got land in my ward, for example, as well as elsewhere around Swansea. Manston Estate, and they have surplus land. It may be worth talking to some of those estates to see, is there suitable land there which we could use for the More Homes project in the future? Just a thought.
Yeah, so we are looking at the direct delivery with private developers. So, private developers can purchase land in areas that we don't have any land to develop, where there's a housing need. So Sketty's a perfect example. We've got very little land in Sketty, but if a private developer was minded to purchase land, they could come to us then with a direct delivery option. And that is something that we are considering at the moment. It's not a model that we've ever used, but we are thinking about, we are making moves into that territory. We know that RSLs have done that for quite some time, quite successfully. So that's something that the council are very interested in. Other councils are further down the journey than us, but it's definitely an option, particularly if we've got high demand in an area and we know that we desperately need more social homes there. It's a good opportunity for us.
Okay, thank you. So the next question, 13, Councillor Mary Baker, who's online.
Hi. The question was about the council, ex-council stock, buying back ex-council stock. I've asked around a few of the private ones that are empty up here. There's one just up the road from me on Putney Avenue. It's been empty for a long, long time. We've been trying to chase the landlord of it. Nobody seems to know who's bought it. It's been handed bought on once, bought on twice. We can't find who is the landlord on that property to advise, look, if you want to sell it back to the council. I know when they buy ex-council property, when we had the right to buy, it was written in that if ever they sell the property, council was supposed to have first offer. I'm wondering if that is still written in or has it gone on a lay-by somewhere?
Okay, so in terms of the right to buy acquisitions, the information in terms of the acquisitions programme is on the website so that people can find that. And I think it does get round through word of mouth as well. So we get quite a lot of inquiries coming in. Obviously, we're limited with our budget, etc. In terms of what's written into the leases, I believe there were a couple of occasions where the buyback was included in the leases, but the leases were all completely different. So we have to look at every lease, especially for the flats. So it might have been included in the leases for the flats, but it probably wouldn't have been included in the houses. Although we are predominantly buying back one-bedroom flats, as you say, because of the need. So if you've got a couple of examples where you're struggling to find the landlord, perhaps we can look into that, Councillor Baker, for you.
Okay.
But all the information relating to that is in the is on the website, and we've got an officer in the More Homes team, Tim Padfield, who deals specifically with the buyback acquisition programme, and he will be able to advise you and also advise any of the owners who are thinking about selling the property. sort of with the benefits of selling it back to the council.
Councillor Lewis.
Just to make you aware, I do a mail shopper every year in April, May time. So I would mention the buyback scheme in that mail shot, and that mail shot goes to empty property owners to make them aware of assistance available to them to bring their properties back to occupation.
Thank you. And Councillor Lewis.
Yeah, just to reference that, you know, it's been such a popular programme that we run out of money every financial year. So we're going into a new financial year now. So we'll have a new pot of money that we can explore buying more back. But we also, I think as Sally was referencing, we target the leaseholders in a communal block, because it's much easier for us in terms of bringing a property back into Welsh Housing Quality Standard if the council own the whole block. So we do tend to target that, as well as the fact that Carol referenced that we're looking at 1-bedroom properties because there's such a high demand for those. It's also beneficial to us to own the whole block in terms of maintenance and repairs.
Thank you. And I think we got a question online. Councillor Rowlands.
I'm just wondering, Sally said that she sends out something annually to people. I just wondered, you know, the magazine that goes out to the tenants, would it be worth linking something up with them about the potential buyback? Maybe they'd have some influence as to who that could go back to then.
We don't advertise that to current tenants, but we do and have in the past written to all the leaseholders who may be interested in selling their properties back. So as Andrew said as well, we need to be careful how widely we market this, because we have a limited pot of money, and our budget for next year, the number of properties we've got in the pipeline to buy back next year, I think our budget's already pretty spent for next year as well. So we're looking for opportunities for additional funding, but we can't, we have to manage expectation about how many we can, afford to buy back each year.
Councillor Black.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the buyback option in the right to buy from freehold was mostly in national parks when that existed. But I'm happy to send Maya the link to the land registry site if she wants to do her own research at some stage, because it is a very useful site to do to get that sort of information if need be.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas.
Thanks. Just a question on the budgeting for that. Where does it come from, and how much are you talking about? And how many properties were you able to buy? Thanks.
It's varied each year. So we've had sort of different housing grants. We've had TACP, which is the Transitional Accommodation Program. I can't remember what the C stands for. Capital Program. Yeah, we use social housing grant. So we use a proportion of that. We've used some 106 funding, which is earmarked, can only be used for the purchase of affordable housing. So we've had a variety of funds. Our acquisitions programs ranging about £1 million a year. And I'd say the average cost is about 150,000. So we're able to add to the stock, with those numbers each year, maybe.
And I suppose the ambition is much higher than that, but obviously the funds don't allow it. Is there Welsh Government conversations going on with other authorities about funding it in other ways?
Yeah, so I currently sit on the Affordable Housing Task Force group that are making recommendations to Welsh Government in terms of how we can reach the affordable housing target in Wales of 20,000 homes. And part of that is about having more funding for acquisitions and acquisition programmes, not just in stockholding authorities, but also RSLs can use that grant as well.
So one more question. Sorry, does the council have the ability to borrow against its existing stock to fund others, or is that not how it works in the account?
Yeah, we do have the ability to borrow. However, there is a borrowing cap, and also that money is for more homes as well. So we use the funding and the borrowing elements, but borrowing rates, I can hear Ben Smith in my ear at the moment, are not great at this moment in time. So we are trying to limit our borrowing as much as we possibly can.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Nobody online. Okay, going on to my question, which sort of links in really. Regards to selling properties back to the council, is it a requirement that the property has to be empty, or if there is a tenant in there at the moment, instead of removing the tenant, I just wanted to know what the policy was with regards to if you're buying that property back, do you have to have it as empty, or can the tenant stay in it?
We look at each individual case, it's in the circumstances. So we have done bought properties where there's been a tenant in situ, but it's been for sort of extreme circumstances really around preventing homelessness, etc. So ideally we want to buy an empty property and take someone off our waiting list, and house that household. But we have bought a very small number of properties in particular circumstances where there's been a tenant in situ, where we've been able to justify that, and there's been a strategic reason to do that, i.e. preventing homelessness.
So the main aim is just to purchase those empty properties rather than the ones that are currently lived in.
Yeah.
Okay. And I know on going on to my next question, which was paragraph 2.16 states that 2% of the properties at any one time are empty. I know it might be a bit of an ask, but I was just wondering, appreciate the tenants obviously pay rent. How much loss are we making at that sort of particular time with that 2% out of action?
Okay, I've got the rent loss here. Somebody's very kindly calculated that for us. So the void rent loss over the year for an empty property is 1,700,000. I can't. My glasses.
538.
538. So that's the cumulative rent loss over the year for those 2% of properties being empty.
What 1.5 was it? Sorry.
1.7
1.7.
million. Yeah.
Yeah, of course you can.
Yeah, just to expand on that a little bit. So as a precautionary tale, that when we have voids, it's not quite as simple as just turning them around and renting them again. Often we've got voids which, for example, haven't had upgraded kitchens and bathrooms. So we'll take the opportunity to carry out those works before we let it again. So, they might sit looking as though they're empty, but that is a constant churn in terms of different properties all the time for different reasons. And we have to do mandatory gas and electrical safety checks as well. So we need to make sure that property is fit before we relet.
I think I read something about the flooring as well. You have to redo the flooring. Yeah. Okay. Nothing else on that. And I'll move to the next question, which is regarding commercial outlets being converted into houses, because it was sort of briefly mentioned in the report. Is there any data on privately owned businesses that maybe have plans to convert into houses? So I know of a couple of locations throughout the city, but I'd just be interested if we had that data to hand.
Yeah, so we don't have anyone from planning here today, but they have provided a written response. So we don't record this information specifically. Details of any planning applications that have been submitted will be available to view on the public website. However, there's no easy way of searching, as descriptions vary, and there is no Welsh Government classification specifically for this change of use that could be used as a search criteria. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, no, because it's just interesting if we've had plan permissions being granted, and some I appreciate may take, because of the cost of materials, maybe sitting on land where they are wanting to build houses. It's just interesting to see how many houses are going to come into circulation, because I appreciate some will go to social housing. So I'm sure it would help the council in their sort of forecasting of properties going forward. It's just a shame we don't have that. I appreciate it's probably quite hard with the planning process and everything, but it'd just be nice to know if there was stuff coming in the pipeline. So thank you. I think Councillor Rowlands online wants to come in.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered, when this is going through planning, does the empty property department have any influence over the decision made by the planning department?
No. As I say, I have no influence over planners at all.
It's a shame, really, because I'm sure there are some properties where you would see that there would be a benefit to it being developed, and it's a shame that there wasn't a mechanism that you could put a small report in that would help the decision, not influence, but certainly help the planner's decision.
In all honesty, I do actually have, over recent years, I've started to work quite closely with planning. There's a few officers in planning, so we'll do joint visits. And sometimes if we're targeting a particularly problematic, I can think of two off the top of my head now, that are an absolute nightmare. And we've done a joint approach. So literally bombarded the owners with notices, and at the same token, like actually one of them, I've got the mortgage company to repossess it, and used all those notices as a this is a problem to you, this is your asset. So that relationship with planning over recent years has been really good. But generally speaking, I wouldn't become involved in a planning decision, just an enforcement.
Do planning have access to statutory notices that you don't have access to? Is that the case in terms of properties in disrepair or land in nuisance?
To be honest, I don't think so. It's just that if I come across something that I think is a 215 under the Town and County Planning, I will liaise with the planners then.
So I think I've used planning in terms of derelict land before. They can serve notice on that, I think. Yeah.
Yes, that they probably can, but they've got to build quite a significant case, I think, because they go down the prosecution route, so.
Councillor White online.
Yeah, and again, with regard planning, I think the planners would be made aware if the premises had been been marketed to try and sell whatever, and I know sort of interest had been shown or whether it was feasible to convert that property. So that would be probably contained in the planning report that officers would probably look at.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. On to my last question, number 17, regarding the graph in 2.4. I'm glad I wasn't the only one that didn't quite understand at the time, but can you explain what is meant by the new dwellings? If that's okay.
Thank you, Councillor. Basically, so if you have a property that's brought back into use, if it's then subdivided, you could have a property that's then split into two flats. So it's the creation then of that additional newer dwelling, could be an industrial unit or a commercial unit that's brought into residential or into that use, and hence the new creation of a dwelling that didn't exist before.
Great, thanks for clarifying. I wasn't sure if I was missing something, so thank you for that.
Nobody on the Chair, I think the notes I was thinking was section 215 of Town Planning Country. Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Thomas, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, thanks. Just one last quick question from me to Sally. Just wondering, long-term probate issues, how much of a problem is that? Because I know, yeah, I bet. And are you ever able to lean on the solicitors a bit to speed them up, or is there any powers there at all for you to sort of crack the whip a bit, or is it just a problem you've got to live with?
This is where I see the need for this genealogy stuff, maybe going on. I mean, don't get me wrong, you've got two cases. One where it's a long-term empty because it's category F, deceased, probate not yet issued, and the solicitors, the owners are dealing with it, and it's just taking a while. And then I would just take the normal approach of, if there are notices need to be served, but mainly trying to be a bit empathetic as well. I have got an empathy gene. But then on the other side of things, you'll have properties where we don't know who the owners are, and it's still that long-term category F. And this is where I would love to see this genealogy stuff come into play. I've only just caught on to it over the last, few months because it's lost revenue for council tax as well, and it's identifying those owners, those beneficiaries, so that's where that would be really good.
Could you expand on what you mean by the genealogy?
Right. Okay. So again, it's something that's just floating around in my head at the moment. I've done a little bit of research on it. Spoken to Andrew Lavender, who's the empty property expert in the Welsh Assembly government, because he's my first go-to person for this sort of thing. Apparently, Caerphilly Council are doing something on it. Bristol Council have done something. So basically, what they've done is they've done a soft tender process to recruit a company, a bit like a Finders International type thing. So that would be the go-to company that they go to. So they've got a property, they know the owner's died. It's like refer it to them. They would then find the if there are any relatives or the next of kin, and more often than not, they sign those relatives up. I'm assuming they take a percentage of the, with an agreement, and they would tend to settle probate, sell the estate, and then these people that didn't know they were due to inherit will inherit the rest. So it's just, I kind of feel there could be something done around there, but it's having the time to do it, and am I the right person? And
so often there's properties where someone's died and there's no next of kin, there's no solicitors been instructed, and it just sits in limbo for years, and that's a big problem, right?
So at the moment, it's not a big problem, but you do come across them, and I'm trying to scrabble around trying to find, relatives, and some of those then I would go down the enforced sale route eventually if there was work that needed to be done that would justify the initial notice. Yes, so yeah, so that they are.
And have you looked into how much that would cost for the council to do something similar to the other authorities, or?
I think it's just
per property.
Yes.
So there's no cost to the council. The genealogy companies get their cost back from the sale of the estate. So there's no burden on us, which is why it's quite a good option. But we've only got certain means of tracing owners. So obviously our first port of call is to do a land registry check. We do various different checks with companies that we can, but they've got much stronger methods of finding the owners. So the one Edmo that we have got, for example, we've never found that owner, and we've had that since 2009. The last address we've got is in Hong Kong. We've got no idea if we assume they're dead, but we have no idea. Whereas if we had a genealogy company that we could give that to, they'd probably have more success than us.
Okay, it sounds like a good recommendation.
I've done a bit of a briefing. I was hoping that council tax might have time to do it, but they've actually got their own things to deal with. So I have done a briefing note on it. It's something that's sitting in the background, but it's it's a resource issue as far as I'm concerned. And my mail shot is coming up, and my empties return, and so at the moment, no. Yeah.
Could we have a copy of the briefing notes?
We'll have to top and tail it, because there's a few bits and pieces in there that we need to bottom out with sharing of data and making sure that we captured all possible ramifications. Yeah.
Yeah, keep ones.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart's not able to be with us today, so his are the last two questions. So I'll read them out on his behalf. Enforcement action. I noted that the council has been successful on 23 occasions and been able to take enforcement action as described in 2.9. How many attempts have been unsuccessful, and what has normally been the difficulty? And how many complaints referrals have been received in relation to the state or repair of empty properties within the same time period?
Okay, thank you. So we don't generally have unsuccessful attempts. We don't like failure in our section, but it's generally used as a kind of last resort. So as Sal's kind of alluded to, one thing she's very, very good at is being tenacious and tracking down people and talking to them and using sort of different ways and means to coerce and encourage and yeah, different ways to get properties back into use. So kind of enforced sale and enforcement is a last resort. You know, we don't need to do that most of the time. So we had a look at the figures and we had 143 complaints received relating to empty properties in this financial year. So obviously that's slightly less than a year, but only by a few days. We've had 223 inquiries from empty property owners, which is often due to Sal's mail shot that she sends out at this time of year. We've served 29 notices, and then there's been the 23 enforced sales since 2007. A couple of property owners settled their debt prior to that happening. And we've done 6 lots of works in default. Got a few underway, but I would say 90% of the work is not enforcement and legal action. It's, you know,
It's the process leading up to it.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's fine, thank you. And his last question was regeneration. Has the council reviewed and evaluated all of the property that it owns and leases for the possibility of conversion? So where the property is empty or has empty areas, i.e. the upper floors, above ground floor on the commercial properties?
I think that's one for the corporate property team. And again, is that okay if we follow that up?
No written response. Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you. That leads us to the 19 questions complete, but is there anybody online or in the room that wants to add any additional? No? Fantastic. So that just leaves me to thank the cabinet member and all the officers, one for your time today and all the data and compiling everything beforehand. We do appreciate it because particularly when there's like sometimes a one-man band or one-woman band, it's a lot of work. So I do appreciate you all attending today. You're more than welcome to stay, but I'm pretty sure you've got other places to be. So you can use this opportunity to depart if you want. So just a thank you and enjoy the rest of your day. If the councillors want to stay online, because obviously we're going to do the recommendations after. So if you just bear with us online for a couple of minutes.
Bye, everyone.
If those online, just hang fire for the moment, just while the officers and cabinet member leave, and then we can discuss the recommendations then. Okay, thank you, everyone. They've all departed, so it should be a little bit quieter now. This is the part where we have the discussion and conclusions of the discussion we just had. So is there, I know Rachel's been madly writing some notes for us. Taken from what the officers and cabinet member have said, is there any points that you would really like to highlight for recommendation going back to them? I'm happy to just put your hands up and I'll go to whoever really. Councillor Thomas in the room.
Yeah, first point on the empty properties, when the council, when the council are buying a property, they said that they sometimes do that with the tenant in, but that's the last resort. I don't really see why that's a last resort because, you know, if they're buying a council property, obviously they want to reduce the housing stock, but if they're forcing someone who's selling to evict the tenant, you know, they're robbing Peter to pay.
Yeah, essentially, yeah,
exactly. They're putting someone out of the house. So that one didn't make sense to me. The genealogy stuff, I thought that, yeah, that was interesting, and maybe, you know, I don't know what the recommendation is there, but I think obviously Sally needs some help or resource, or a company that she can just
Was it free? Because
I think the issue was it's not on the recommended supplier list.
Right.
So we need to make a recommendation. I think that the council sort that out.
Yeah.
So that resource is available to the empty homes officer.
Yeah, so she can just pick up the phone to someone then, whoever wins the
Yeah.
tender, and yeah.
Yes, the other point. Yes, the other point is these genealogy companies charge a fee because that's how they actually make their money. So, and the fee is quite substantial.
But they load that onto the house, don't they, rather than the council, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really important one. Go on, sorry, Bridge.
So just to say, with that genealogy, I think what I wouldn't like to see is I see it as a good tool to be used, but I don't think we should rely on it 100% and almost use it as an excuse as to why it's not been done. And I would just say, it probably just needs to be treated very cautiously. I see it as a benefit and it can be used, but I wouldn't like it to be used as an excuse as to why matters aren't moving forward.
Yeah, can I make a comment? That's a really good point, actually. And also, if Sal's first stop was to go to the genealogy, you're probably creating a huge bill for the house owner off the bat straight away, rather than
So it should be used as a last resort.
Well, there should be a policy that maybe she tries X, Y, Z first, and then if she can't find that, then use it. Yeah.
I think rather than telling Sally how to do her job, I think the issue here is making sure as many tools as possible are available to her. So the genealogy can be one extra tool. And I talked about compulsory purchase. There would need to be some primary legislation to use compulsory purchase in the way I'd like to use it. But certainly I think that we need to try to have as many tools as possible available to try to bring these properties back into use.
The only other thing that you mentioned, Peter, during the meeting, that the council tax appeals for people who've when it's gone up to double. I know it's not strictly to do with what we're talking about on the agenda, but I think it's a good time to bring it up. Is I've also had people who've been unsuccessful with appeals who on the face value, I've been around to see them and it seems very genuine. They're doing up a house, they can't afford it, they're doing it themselves, it's gone over a year, they're living with their parents still, they're doing up the house. So I think there should be, it didn't sound like there's an appeals process that's in place, and maybe like there should be an internal appeal that, I don't know, every quarter a couple of people get around a table and look at them and make a decision.
I think we should ask certainly what the criteria is, I had a situation where people were living next door to two empty properties and it was starting to affect their property. If they actually bought it next door to do up, but then COVID hit, and it was over 12 months, and they had the double council tax, and they appealed and they didn't get anywhere because which I thought was a fairly reasonable thing. They bought the property, it's now occupied, by the way, to do up, and so it wouldn't have this empty house next to them, which is quite admirable, I thought. And suddenly they've found themselves hit with 200% council tax because it took longer than 12 months to sort out simply because COVID hit. So I think some criteria would be useful to see what the criteria is.
So on that point, not just now that we're sort of 5 years on from COVID, to get any builders in at the moment, you're talking about 2 years sometimes.
God,
so it's not a quick turnaround. So we don't want to discourage people from investing, private investors. Ultimately they are still providing homes for people. So it does fit into the empty homes property, it does fit into that umbrella. So it is worth looking at.
I think the other thing was the leasing scheme Wales, just a strong recommendation that we need to take that up. I know they're looking at it, but just to reinforce that particularly, because that is another tool which would be available when we don't want to use an empty dwelling management order and we don't have the compulsory purchase or the enforced sale option available to us. Yeah, there are issues with the housing revenue account in terms of capital, which I can't talk about in public. I'll tell you later if you want.
Anybody online with any observations or anything, any points that they would really want to?
Sorry, yeah, just one other thing. I think it's worth noting. They mentioned obviously they got about was it £1 million, maybe a bit more, to purchase old council properties. No, it's not a lot. No, and yeah. I think all I would say is something along the lines of, you know, try and get more money from somewhere.
Yeah.
Right.
It's borrowing.
Like your mic, sorry.
They've got to keep that within the housing revenue account, and it is borrowing, but there are issues with the borrowing at the moment because they've had to keep certain amount of money in the reserves because of legal issues.
Right.
I'll tell you about it later.
Yeah, but there's other places I'm sure they could, you know, bring money into play for that, but thanks.
There was one point when you were talking then, and it's gone as quickly as it's come into my head. Oh no, I'm so not going down the age route yet, but I can't think what it was, but it was something to do along the lines of that, but it's gone from me. But nobody online, anything else? No. That's very annoying. It'll come to me later, won't it? In that case, Rachel, are you happy with the notes and recommendations? Do you want to recap, or are you okay?
There's also quite a number of questions that they need to get back
Answer.
on, wasn't there? I think.
Yeah,
I
those written
made a note of
questions.
about 4 or 5 questions that there'll be a written answer from. So there'll be those as well to add into the letter.
That's great. In that case, then, if there's nothing else, just to thank everyone in person and online for attending. Very interesting. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And I think, Rachel, you'll circulate the letter.
Yep, so I'll send you as chair the first copy to have a look at, and then they'll be circulated to all attendees then to have a read over before we send it through to the cabinet member.
That's amazing. Okay, thanks all. Have a good day online as well.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye. Bye.